Very good afternoon, students. In this video, I am going to tell you the questions in relation to the norma, basalis, interna. That means what may be the possible question in Viva onto the base of the skull if the skull is seen from inside. That means after cutting the skull cape or calvaria, when you see the interior of the brain box or at the base of the skull, which is the norma basalis interna. There are many bones forming it, and then there are various foramina through which the cranial nerves they come out. Now these are the two diagrams which you are seeing, one in the showing you the bones forming the base of the skull, and another is showing the various bones in different colors which are taking part in the formation of the base of the skull. Now let us see here this foci or the base of the skull is divided into the three foci: anterior cranial fossa, middle cranial fossa and posterior cranial fossa. The demarcation between this cranial fossae is this: the anterior and middle cranial fossa are limited. Posterior, I mean say between these two fossae there is a boundary, and where I am moving the pointer, this is the lesser wing of the sphenoid anterior clinoid process of the one side, and then this is the lesser clinoid, I mean say lesser lesser wing of the sphenoid of the other side. Okay, so whatsoever area lies in front of this, here you can see this area here is called as the anterior cranial fossa. Now between the lesser wing of the sphenoid anterior clinoid process and the anterior margin of sulcus chiasmaticus, okay, and the same on other side, and posteriorly it is bounded by the superior border of the petrous, where I am moving this pointer. It is the superior border of petrous temporal bone, and this is the dorsum sali, again the superior border of petrous temporal bone on the other side. This is the posterior boundary or boundary between the middle and the posterior cranial fossa. That means this part here, which is a butterfly like part constricted in center and then wing like structure on either side, it is the middle cranial fossa, and then posteriorly this is the posterior cranial fossa, in the midline of which there is a large foramina called as foramina magnum. So then the question will come, when you are holding this skull and looking at the base of the skull, examiner will ask, tell me the bones which are forming the anterior cranial fossa, and then you can say that there are three bones which are forming the anterior cranial fossa. This is the frontal bone, which is a single bone extending on right as well as left side. Anteriorly it forms the bone of the forehead, and then this here at the floor of the I mean to say base of the skull, this plate is the orbital plate of the frontal bone, which forms the roof of the orbits, okay, which lodges the eyeball. Okay, so this is the orbital plate of the frontal bone. In between the two orbital plate, in the midline, this yellow color bone, which is interposed between two orbital plate, okay, is ethmoid bone, the cribriform plate of the ethmoid and the crista galea. Okay, and then in the midline, the posterior bone, which is shown in this color here, is called as the lesser wing of the sphenoid on either side, extending into the anterior clinoid process, and in midline it is the jugum sphenoidale, okay, a flat portion of the sphenoid bone, which is posteriorly continuous with a transverse sulcus chiasmaticus. Okay, of course the sulcus chiasmaticus is not part of the floor of the anterior cranial fossa. So these are the three bones. Then the question will come, why there are the elevations and depressions seen on the orbital plate of the frontal bone? You can say that these impressions are because of the sulcus and gyri of the frontal lobe of the brain, okay, of the cerebral cortex. Okay, then he may ask you, which is a very important suture seen here. Then this is the suture between the posterior margin of the orbital plate and the sphenoid bone. Okay, frontosphenoid suture, this suture here. Okay, this will be the most of the, I mean to say, most important question. Then and another question may be there, what is a foramina known as between the crista galli and the occipital, I mean to say this frontal crest. This margin which is seen in midline is the frontal crest, and this is the crista galli. In between two there is a foramina, what is called as foramina cecum. Okay, that is foramina cecum. Then if you are replying well, then he can again ask that which foraminas are present on the lateral margin on either side of this cribriform plate of the ethmoid. You can say that it is anterior and posterior ethmoidal foraminas openings are there. Anterior is always there, posterior may not be there, okay, through which will come out the anterior ethmoidal nerve. Right, then he will ask you what is the boundary of the middle cranial fossa, which I have already covered. You can say that anteriorly it is bounded by the free margin of the lesser wing of the sphenoid, then it is the anterior clinoid process which are bony projection, and then the anterior margin of the sulcus chiasmaticus, and posteriorly it is bounded by the superior border of the petrous temporal bone and the dorsum sali here. Okay, then he may ask you what are the bones which are forming the floor of the middle cranial fossa. Then you can say that in the midline it is the body of the sphenoid, and this depression which is seen or fossa which is seen in midline is the hypophyseal fossa, and which gives lodgement to that of the pituitary gland. So here rests the pituitary gland. These are the posterior end of the two anterior clinoid process, and here on the margin of the dorsum sali will be the posterior clinoid process, which gives attachment to the diaphragma sali, which is the diaphragm, okay, or the roof of the pituitary fossa. Then the bones which are forming the floor is here. Anteriorly this bone which is seen is the greater wing of the sphenoid, and in yellow color is the squamous part of the temporal bone, and posteriorly it is the anterior surface of the petrous temporal bone is there. So the two bones they form the floor. One is the greater wing of the sphenoid and second is the temporal bone. More laterally there will be the lower border of the parietal bone can also come, where I am moving the this pointer. Then he will ask what are the foraminas which you can show me in the middle cranial fossa. Just so there is a canal opening here, just anterior and medial to the anterior clinoid process. This is the opening of the optic canal which will open in the orbit, and this will transmit the optic nerve and the ophthalmic artery. Then this sulcus will give lodgement to that of the sulcus chiasm. It is called sulcus chiasmaticus, where optic chiasma is there. Okay. Then on either side of the pituitary fossa here there is a tunnel like foramina which is called as the foramina rotundum. Posterolateral to the foramina rotundum, he will ask the name of this foramina which is oval in shape, so you call it as foramina ovale. And still posterolateral to this there is a very tiny foramina is seen here in this skull as well as in this skull also. This is the spinosum foramina, and from the foramina how you will identify the foramina spinosum? You can see a groove going here laterally, and this is the trunk of the middle meningeal artery which is dividing into anterior and the posterior branch, and I told you already the anterior branch lies deep inside the petrous part of the, I mean say inside the pterion area. Okay, so this is the middle meningeal artery. Grooves are seen in the floor of the middle cranial fossa. A foramina here irregular is seen here just at the apex of the petrous temporal bone, and this is called as foramina lacerum, which doesn't give passage to any significant structure. Then he will ask you what are the boundaries of the posterior cranial fossa. You can say that anteriorly in midline it is bounded by dorsum sali, then posterior clinoid process, then the superior border of the petrous temporal bone on either side. This will demarcate between the the middle and posterior cranial fossa. Okay, now the bones forming the posterior cranial. And another question, what are the bones which forms the posterior cranial fossa floor? Then you can say mainly it is formed by the occipital bone, basal part, the basis sphenoid part, clivus or the sloping part which is going towards the anterior margin of the foramina magnum. On lateral side it is condylar part, and posteriorly it is the squamous part of the occipital bone. On the side it is the posterior surface of the petrous temporal bone is there. Okay, on the lateral angles there will be the mastoid bone can come here in this. Okay, then he will ask what are the foraminas which are there. You can say that on the posterior surface of the petrous temporal bone there is a opening of the canal what is called as the internal acoustic meatus, in which passes the 8th and 7th cranial nerve, facial and vestibulocochlear and labyrinthine artery will pass through it. And then there is this irregular foramina is there at the junction of the condylar part and the lower border of the petrous temporal bone, and this is the jugular foramina is there. Then he can ask, there is a canal-like structure seen on the margin, lateral margin of the foramina magnum. You can say that this is the opening of the hypoglossal canal for 12th cranial nerve. A deep S-shaped groove, curved groove is seen here, and this is the sigmoid sinus. Groove for the sigmoid sinus is there, and then posteriorly it is the internal occipital crest, internal occipital protuberance, and these are the groove for the transverse sinus. They are the groove for the transverse sinus. Now, these are the structures which are seen at the bones, their sutures, and then the foraminas which are seen on the base of the skull as seen from the internal aspect. Okay. Now again thankful to the Walters and Kluwer for using their diagrams. Okay, this atlas was edited by me about a year back, and I also thank you very much for watching this video onto the base of the skull, the norma basalis interna. Thank you.